If this message has made its way to you before July 14th, then I need you to pause for a moment, not just with your ears, but with your spirit, because this is more than a word. It's more than a coincidence. This is divine alignment. This is heaven interrupting your routine to say, congratulations, you're right on time. You didn't miss the window. You didn't miss the blessing. You didn't get left behind. You are exactly where God wants you to be. And everything that tried to delay you is about to regret it. See, what you've been walking through was not a detour, it was preparation. You thought you were stuck, but God was staging. You thought you were forgotten, but God was forming. The shaking wasn't to destroy you. It was to deliver you. And before July 14 hits, something is shifting. Something is breaking. Something is aligning for your good. The attacks didn't win. The tears didn't drown you. The silence didn't bury you. You're still here. And that means purpose is still in motion. So I came to speak to the ones who've been hanging on by a thread, the ones who almost gave up, the ones who've been hidden, overlooked, or misunderstood. God didn't bring you this far to leave you empty. There's a reward for your endurance, a crown for your pain, a blessing attached to your name. And if this message has found you in time, it's because you are about to walk into something your enemies can't explain and your past can't disqualify. Congratulations, heaven is about to honor your survival. Delay is not denial, it's divine setup. That phrase might sound simple, even cliche, until you live through the kind of season where it feels like everything is on pause, like God hit the brakes on your breakthrough and forgot to press play again. You pray, and it feels like the heavens are silent. You work hard, and the results look like a dry field with no harvest. You show up with faith, but doors don't just stay closed. They slam shut. And in those moments, your mind wants to convince you that it's over, that maybe you missed it, that maybe the promise was never real. But let me speak to the spirit in you that still dares to hope. The delay you're experiencing is not the enemy winning, it's God orchestrating. When God is preparing something weighty, he doesn't rush. Think about it. When you order something fragile, it's packed with extra care. The more valuable it is, the more intentional the process becomes. So maybe what's been happening in your life isn't a punishment, but a packing process. God has been wrapping you in protection, insulation, wisdom, and clarity, not because he's withholding from you, but because he's ensuring that when the blessing reaches you, it doesn't destroy you. Some doors didn't open because you weren't ready. Some people walked away because they couldn't go where God is taking you. Some opportunities dried up because they were distractions dressed as promotion. You see, divine timing isn't about convenience, it's about capacity. God will never give you something that will bury you under the weight of its responsibility. You've been praying for something big, and that means God has to stretch your spirit to carry it. That's why it's been uncomfortable. That's why it's been quieted. That's why it's been long, because he's building something in you that can stand when others collapse. He's training you to recognize his voice in silence. He's stripping away your need for approval, applause, and constant affirmation so that when the spotlight hits, your identity won't shift with the crowd. And I get it, waiting is hard, especially when you're watching other people receive what you've been praying for. It makes you question if you're forgotten, if you're being punished, if maybe God skipped over your name. But what if I told you you weren't skipped, you were being shielded? There's a kind of blessing that doesn't just change your situation, it changes your soul. And that kind of blessing requires a different kind of preparation. God delays what he loves, not because he's cruel, but because he's careful. He's preserving the promise so that it doesn't arrive premature. He's adjusting the atmosphere around you so that when the shift comes, you're planted, not tossed. Think about Joseph, called, chosen, favored, but thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, forgotten in prison. If you looked at any moment in isolation, it would look like delay. It would look like God wasn't answering. But in the background, God was aligning every piece of the puzzle. He was turning injustice into elevation. He was using betrayal to position Joseph for influence. If Joseph had rushed the process, he would have missed the palace. And some of us are trying to microwave what God wants to marinate. We're so focused on speed, but God is focused on substance. There are things God is doing in you that can't be rushed. Character development, healing from past trauma, purging pride, birthing vision. All of that takes time. And if he gave you what you asked for before you were whole, you'd sabotage it. God doesn't want you to just receive the blessing. He wants you to sustain it. That's why the delay exists. Not to torture you, but to train you. He's teaching you how to worship without results, how to trust without proof, how to walk in faith even when you feel empty-handed. Because once you master that, you become unstoppable. Not because life stops being hard, but because your foundation is no longer based on outcomes, it's based on obedience. You thought the waiting season was wasted time, but it was actually sacred time. God was pruning, God was detoxing, God was pruning relationships that couldn't grow with you. God was breaking cycles that you thought were normal. God was removing props so you would learn how to stand. The delay wasn't a denial, it was a detox. He's been emptying you of everything that would have contaminated the blessing. And sometimes the greatest gift God gives you is the time to become someone who won't fumble the miracle. So yes, it took longer than expected. Yes, you had to watch others go ahead of you. Yes, you had to endure rejection that bruised your heart, but you're still here, still standing, still believing. And whether you see it or not, that's proof that the delay did not destroy you. It developed you. You're stronger now. You're wiser now. You don't chase what you used to chase. You don't settle for what you used to settle for. You don't apologize for taking up space. And that right there is a setup. Because when God moves, he moves fast. And he moves when your spirit is ready, not when your ego is desperate. So instead of begging God to speed it up, maybe this is the season to ask him to finish what he started in you. Because the real flex is not arriving early. It's arriving whole. It's showing up in the room knowing that you didn't force it, manipulate it, or fake your way through it. You trusted, you waited, you surrendered. And now when the moment comes, you won't be overwhelmed. You'll be prepared. That's what divine setup looks like. It's not always pretty. It's not always public, but it's always perfect because God knows what he's doing, even when it feels like nothing's happening. Your obedience protected a blessing you haven't seen yet. And I know that's hard to digest when all you have in front of you is the silence of a season that looks like nothing's changing. When you obeyed, you expected movement. You expected reward. You expected the fruit to show up right after the sacrifice. But what do you do when your obedience doesn't give you results? It gives you resistance. When your yes to God doesn't open doors, but instead shuts the ones you thought were yours. That's where faith gets tested. That's where your roots go deeper. Because real obedience isn't proven in the presence of outcomes. It's proven in the absence of them. Some of you walked away from relationships that fed your flesh but drained your spirit. You obeyed. You disconnected even when your heart still craved the comfort of dysfunction. And because of that one decision, you set something in motion in the spiritual realm. You thought you were just letting go of a person, but what you were really doing was making room for purpose. You thought you were just choosing peace, but what you really did was partner with heaven. You chose healing over habit. And that obedience, it didn't go unnoticed. It wasn't a wasted moment. It was a seed sown into soil you haven't seen yet. Others of you were told to stay when everything in you wanted to run. You wanted to quit, walk away, ghost the process, but God whispered, be still. And even though it made no sense, because staying looked like stagnation, you obeyed. You sat in the discomfort. You stayed in the job. You endured the isolation. And what you didn't see was how heaven was watching. That obedience held back an attack. It built spiritual muscle. It positioned you for something greater. It looked like nothing, but it was everything. Because obedience is never small when it's rooted in trust. And trust is never wasted when it's planted in God. You don't even realize the kind of storms you avoided just by listening, the conversations you didn't enter, the revenge you didn't take, the posts you didn't make, the apologies you gave, even when your pride said, let them come to you. That obedience felt like weakness, but in the spirit, it was warfare. You silenced the enemy without saying a word. You chose maturity over ego. You chose obedience over optics. And God has a way of rewarding those quiet, unseen choices in ways that go beyond anything you could ask or imagine. You may not have seen it yet, but you will. Because obedience always leaves a trail that God follows with blessing. And let's talk about the doors that didn't open. You prayed, you fasted, you prepared, you even got your hopes up, and still it didn't happen. And somewhere deep inside, the enemy whispered, see, you did all that for nothing. But what if it wasn't a missed opportunity? It was a divine interception. What if God saw something behind that door that you didn't? What if the salary couldn't cover the spiritual cost? What if the platform would have poisoned your purpose? What if the relationship would have buried your identity? Your obedience didn't unlock that door because that door was a trap. And while you were crying over what didn't happen, heaven was celebrating what was avoided. Obedience doesn't always give you a trophy. Sometimes it gives you protection. Sometimes it gives you delay that feels like punishment, but is actually preservation. Sometimes it gives you loneliness that forces you to lean into God instead of people. And while it may not feel like a blessing now, it is. You've been shielded by your surrender, covered by your commitment, guarded by your growth. You didn't even know it, but your obedience rerouted your future. It shifted your lineage. It broke generational cycles. It changed the trajectory of your children's children. And all you did was say yes when it would have been easier to say no. There's a reason the enemy tried to frustrate you in the middle of your obedience. Because frustration makes you question faith. It makes you doubt the instructions. And if you're not careful, you'll undo in doubt what you built in obedience. But God didn't ask you to understand. He asked you to trust. He asked you to obey. And some blessings are reserved for those who keep walking, even when they feel blindfolded. You didn't know where you were going, but you followed. You didn't have the blueprint, but you had the burden. And obedience is about trusting the voice even when the vision is blurry. You're not the same person you were before you obeyed. You've grown. You've let go. You've risen above the chaos. And that inner transformation is the proof that something is happening, even if nothing looks different on the outside. Sometimes obedience doesn't change the situation. It changes you. It grows you into the kind of person who can be trusted with what you prayed for. That's why you couldn't skip the process. That's why God wouldn't let you take shortcuts, because the blessing wasn't just about receiving, it was about becoming. And becoming takes obedience. You thought you were obeying for today, but you were obeying for tomorrow, for next year, for the divine appointment that hasn't yet been scheduled on your calendar. You are obeying for rooms you don't even know you're going to enter, for people you haven't even met, for opportunities that would never recognize the old version of you. Your yes has a ripple effect. It breaks things off your bloodline. It births things in your spirit. It unlocks things in others. That's why the fight has been so fierce, because your obedience carries weight. And I know it's hard when you don't have confirmation, when there's no applause, no open doors, no prophetic word to hold on to, just a quiet knowing that God said, do it. And you did. That's where trust is forged. That's where heaven leans in. Because God honors obedience more than talent, more than gifting, more than appearance. Obedience is the language of faith. It's the sound of surrender. It's what separates those who are called from those who are chosen. You didn't need to see the whole path. You just needed to take the next step. And you did. Before the deadline, God will deliver. That may sound like just another hopeful phrase, but for someone who's been standing in the tension of time, watching the calendar, counting the days, waiting on a move from heaven, it's a lifeline. When the pressure is rising and the clock is ticking, your faith starts to tremble under the weight of uncertainty. You start to wonder if you heard God right. If he really said what you think he said. No, if the promise still stands, or if you've missed the moment. But let me tell you this, God doesn't tease his children with timing. He doesn't set deadlines just to watch you break. If he told you it would happen, then it will, right on schedule. There's something about deadlines that stirs both hope and fear. On one hand, a deadline gives us something to hold on to. It creates an expectation, a sense of anticipation. But when that deadline gets close and nothing seems to be moving, anxiety tries to hijack your faith. Your mind starts spinning with questions. What if it doesn't happen? What if I was wrong? What if I believed too boldly, expected too much, hoped too high? But God is not intimidated by the countdown. In fact, he often waits until just before the breakthrough to show up, not because he's late, but because he's intentional. When you've exhausted your plans and strategies, when your hands are empty and your heart is worn out, that's when his glory hits the hardest. Think about the Red Sea. God could have split it before the Egyptians got close. He could have opened the path before panic set in, but he waited until his people were surrounded, until there was no other option, until fear had done its full work. And then, right before destruction, he delivered. That wasn't a delay. That was a divine strategy. Because when God delivers just before the deadline, there's no room for confusion. No one can take credit. No one can say it was luck or coincidence. It's clearly God, clearly supernatural, clearly him making a way out of no way. You've been looking at the time thinking you're about to run out of it. But what if I told you God is not subject to time? He created it. And anything the Creator builds, he controls. So when he gives you a promise, he's not consulting the clock. He's consulting your character. He's aligning circumstances. He's preparing people you haven't even met yet. He's orchestrating connections that are hidden right now, but will be revealed at the exact moment they need to be. Because he's not just concerned with delivering to you. He's concerned with delivering you into something that will last. Some of you have been staring at a deadline with fear, thinking if God doesn't come through by then, it's over. The rent's due, the diagnosis is hanging, the opportunity expires, the transition has to happen. You've even told yourself, if it doesn't happen by this date, I'll take that as a sign that God said no. But be careful with setting human expiration dates on divine instruction. Just because the pressure is real doesn't mean the promise is void. Just because the deadline looks impossible doesn't mean God is done. He often shows up in the 11th hour, not because he wants to stress you out, but because he wants to stretch your belief. You're not being punished, you're being positioned. Positioned to witness something that can't be explained naturally. Positioned to receive a miracle that wouldn't have been needed if things were comfortable. Positioned to recognize that God isn't just a provider. He's a timely provider, a God of precision, a God who doesn't miss. So even when it feels like he's running late, trust that he's arriving exactly when he needs to. Because when it's time, it won't be hard. It won't be forced. It won't be manipulated. It'll be right. It'll be clear. It'll be God. This is why the enemy has been attacking your patience. He knows your faith is connected to your endurance. If he can get you to give up before the deadline, you'll miss the door that was about to open. If he can distract you with fear and frustration, you'll settle for something less than what God planned. So every delay you felt, every not yet you've received, every silence you've endured, it wasn't to torment you, it was to test the strength of your trust. Because faith that folds under pressure isn't faith, it's just optimism. But faith that stands in the storm, faith that keeps walking when the deadline is close and the answer hasn't come, that's the kind of faith heaven responds to. There's something beautiful about watching God move in the final hour. It's humbling, it's awe-inspiring. It reminds you that you are not your source. You are not the orchestrator. You are the vessel, the believer, the one who waits and watches in warfares in the quiet while God works behind the scenes. You don't have to force it. You don't have to beg for it. You just have to remain in position. Keep your heart soft, keep your ears tuned, keep your spirit open, because when the moment comes, and it will come, you'll want to be ready. Some blessings are so big they require timing to protect them. If they come too early, they break you. If they come too late, they miss the mark. But when they come right on time, they shift your entire reality. And that's the kind of delivery God specializes in: strategic, sharp, seamless. But he doesn't just want you to receive it, he wants you to recognize it. So in this waiting, he's building your discernment. In this delay, he's training your sight so that when it happens, you don't question if it's him, you'll know it's him. Oh, yeah. He's delaying on me with his wisdom. This is why you can't quit yet. You're too close. The pressure you're feeling is the tension between promise and performance. You've carried the word long enough. It's time to birth. But birth doesn't come without pain, without stretching, without that final push that feels like you have nothing left. And maybe that's where you are right now, at the end of yourself, at the edge of your hope, at the place where your strength is spent. But that's exactly where God steps in, because when your strength runs out, his strength shows up. When your plans fall apart, his purpose unfolds. When the time is right, he won't delay, he won't hesitate, he will deliver. Congratulations, you're walking into what tried to break you. That sentence may not sound like a victory march at first, but for the ones who've survived storms that left no evidence of survival plans, for the ones who were supposed to quit, supposed to fold, supposed to give up and never recover, this is a declaration of resurrection. You didn't just survive the fire, you absorbed the flame. You didn't just live through the loss, you learned from it. You didn't just take the hit. You stood up with strength you didn't even know you had. And now the very thing that was meant to crush you has become the ground beneath your next step. You're walking into it not with fear, not with shame, but with the authority of someone who knows what it means to bleed and still believe. There's a difference between people who were never touched and people who were wounded but kept moving. You're not walking into this season as someone who had it easy. You're walking in with battle scars that prove you fought in silence, that you prayed in tears, that you praised in pain. And that kind of walk carries weight. That kind of walk shifts atmospheres. That kind of walk announces that what was sent to destroy you failed miserably, because God doesn't just restore you to where you were, he elevates you to where you were always meant to be. And he uses every attack, every betrayal, every rejection as a step toward that place. You're not walking timidly, you're walking with spiritual authority that only comes from surviving what others didn't see. You were fighting demons behind closed doors while smiling in public. You were holding on to God with tired hands and trembling hope. And now heaven has responded. God didn't forget what you walked through. He didn't ignore your late night prayers, your early morning fears, your moments of breaking in secret. What looked like delay was divine protection. What felt like punishment was preservation, because now you're ready. Not perfect, not without pain, but ready. Ready to receive, ready to step in, ready to stand tall where you once crawled. You see, the enemy's mistake was thinking that the attack would define you, that the heartbreak would harden you, that the loss would bury you. But what he didn't realize is that your spirit is built from something eternal. He didn't know that every time you were pressed, something greater came out of you. Oil flows from pressure. Power is born in weakness, and purpose is refined in fire. You were never going to stay in that pit. You were never going to die in that valley. The wilderness was never the final destination. It was preparation for the promise. Now you're walking into what you once feared. You're walking into rooms you used to feel unworthy of. You're stepping into opportunities that would have overwhelmed the old you. But not this version, not the one who's been through betrayal and still loves, not the one who's been through abandonment and still shows up, not the one who's been broken and still believes in restoration. You're walking into the promise with the posture of someone who knows what it costs to be whole. You didn't get here by skipping the pain. You got here by pressing through it. What tried to break you may still whisper sometimes. The voices of doubt, the memories of failure, the flashbacks of who you used to be, they try to echo in your ears when you're walking toward destiny. But now you don't tremble. Now you don't retreat. Now you walk with truth as your compass and grace as your guard. You're not pretending to be strong. You are strong. Strength forged in midnight moments when no one was watching. Strength developed when you had to encourage yourself because no one else knew you were drowning. And now the evidence is showing. The fruit is starting to grow from the soil of your survival. People are starting to see what God was doing in the dark. The same people who counted you out are watching you rise. The same circumstances that made you cry are now being used as testimonies. And you're not here to prove anything to people. You're here to fulfill purpose, to walk in what was promised, to step into what tried to swallow you. You're not just walking into a new season. You're walking into prophecy, into prayers, into the portion of your inheritance that could only be unlocked through pressure. You became the person you are now because something in you refused to die. The part of you that refused to give up is the part that's leading you now. It's not arrogance, it's awareness. You're aware of who God is, aware of what he carried you through, aware that if the enemy could have taken you out, he would have, but he didn't. And now every day you breathe as a reminder that grace was greater, that mercy said yes, that purpose still stands, that you were never forgotten, that heaven had the final word all along. People don't always see the weight you carry. They don't know the cost of your yes, but God does. And he's been watching your steps, measuring your tears, keeping count of your quiet sacrifices. And now this is your reward, not just material things, but peace, confidence, alignment. You're no longer begging for crumbs. You're seated at the table God prepared for you. You're no longer chasing things to prove your worth. You know your worth, and that knowing changes everything. That knowing allows you to walk into what tried to break you and look it in the face with boldness. This is what victory looks like when it comes wrapped in humility. You don't need a parade. You just need peace. You don't need validation. You just need vision. You've been tested and now you're trusted. God knows he can place weight on you and you won't fold. He knows you won't lose him when you gain influence. He knows your heart stayed soft even when life got hard. And because of that, there is a shift taking place, a divine unlocking. Doors you didn't knock on are about to open. Rooms you didn't campaign for are about to call your name, not because you chased them, but because you chased him. You're walking into favor that your tears paid for, walking into clarity that confusion tried to blur, walking into rest after seasons of constant stretching. And this time, You're not going in as the same version of yourself. You've been upgraded in the wilderness. You've been promoted in the pain. You've been transformed in the trenches. What tried to break you was actually building you. And now, as you step forward, you're doing so with the grace of someone who knows God didn't just keep you alive, He kept you aligned. He didn't just bring you through, He brought you up. And this next step is not just for you. It's for everyone who's watching, everyone who's doubting, everyone who needs proof that God still delivers on His promises. God hid you to heal you before He reveals you. It didn't feel like hiding at first. It felt like rejection. Like you were being overlooked, passed by, excluded from rooms you knew you were called to. You watched others be celebrated while your gifts stayed buried. You watched people rise who hadn't paid the price you paid. And deep down, you started wondering if maybe you weren't good enough. Maybe God changed His mind. Maybe what He promised you was just your imagination. But the truth is, God never forgot you. He was covering you, protecting you, shielding you, not because you were weak, but because what was on you was too valuable to be exposed before it was fully healed. There's a difference between being hidden and being forgotten. Being forgotten is the absence of intention, but hiding is strategy. God hides what He values. He hides seeds before they become trees. He hides diamonds before they're mined. He hides greatness in small beginnings and glory in broken places. So if you've been in a season where it feels like your light was dimmed, your name was silenced, and your efforts unseen, don't confuse that with failure. It was healing. It was God saying, I need to mend this before I multiply this, because premature exposure can destroy what hasn't been fully restored. Some of the wounds you carried into your calling couldn't go with you into your assignment. The insecurities, the trauma, the bitterness, the need for validation, they had to be addressed in the quiet. Not because God was punishing you, but because He wanted to promote you without you bleeding on the platform. There are certain things He had to remove in private so that when the spotlight comes, you don't crumble under the weight of what looks like favor. Favor without healing becomes toxic. It inflates the ego and weakens the soul. So God in His mercy pressed pause, not to punish your potential, but to purify your heart. Healing in hiding feels lonely because it's silent. You don't get applause for it. You don't get affirmation from people. You just get stillness. And in that stillness, God starts to show you the version of yourself that needs attention. Not the version people see, but the version that cries in silence. The version that pretends to be strong but feels like they're falling apart. That's the version God was at. That's who He wanted to meet. Because true healing begins when masks come off, when striving stops, when performance breaks and presence becomes enough. He wasn't trying to take opportunities from you. He was trying to teach you that identity isn't built on opportunity, it's built on intimacy. There are people who would have misused your anointing had God revealed you too early. There are platforms that would have praised your talent but drained your soul. And God loved you too much to let you walk into a season that would have looked like a blessing but felt like a battlefield. So He hid you, covered you under the radar, let others shine while He refined you. Let others get recognition while He gave you revelation. Because when you're hidden, your dependence shifts. You stop looking to be seen by man and start leaning into being known by God. And that shift is what prepares you for sustainability. The process of being hidden teaches you to hear God without needing confirmation. It teaches you to walk by faith when there's no audience, to build in silence, to obey without clapping. It breaks the addiction to applause and replaces it with an anchor in obedience. So when the time comes and God does reveal you, you're not swayed by opinions or distracted by attention. You're grounded, you're centered. You've already died to the need to be celebrated because you've been held in the arms of the one who sees everything. You don't need people to validate your worth when heaven already stamped your identity. Healing isn't just about mending wounds, it's about preparing capacity. You've been asking God for big things, big doors, big platforms, big impact, but big things require healed vessels. Otherwise, the weight of what you're asking for will collapse the parts of you that still haven't been made whole. So while you were praying for increase, God was pulling you into the cave, into solitude, into inner work. He was enlarging your capacity to handle the blessing so that when it arrives, you're not just ready externally, you're healthy internally. And that health becomes your foundation. People may have misread your hidden season. They may have assumed you fell off, that you lost your fire, that you missed your moment. But what they didn't see is that you were in the hands of the potter, being reshaped, being remade, being recentered in your purpose. And now that the healing has happened, the revealing is near. But this time, you're not walking out wounded. You're walking out whole. You're not stepping into rooms to prove anything. You're stepping in as confirmation that God still raises those who surrender. Some of the hardest healing happens in the places we thought we were ready for. You thought you were ready for the stage, but God saw a heart that still needed security. You thought you were ready for the relationship, but God saw trauma that would sabotage intimacy. You thought you were ready for leadership, but God saw pride that needed pruning, so he hid you, not to hold you back, but to prepare you for longevity. Because real elevation is not a sprint, it's a stewardship. And God won't let you manage what you can't maintain in peace. There is a deep strength that comes from healing in private. It creates endurance. It builds trust. It silences fear. It teaches you that even when no one claps, you're still called. Even when no one sees, God is watching. Even when the world forgets your name, heaven remembers your assignment. And that truth will carry you into the season of revealing, because now you're not chasing stages, you're stewarding assignments. You're not thirsty for attention, you're full from time with God. And that fullness is the evidence that the healing worked. The hiding place became the healing place, and the healing place became the proving ground. Now you're emerging not as someone who needs the light, but as someone who carries it. You're emerging with scars that don't speak of shame, but of survival. You're emerging with clarity that can't be shaken, with confidence that doesn't need to be loud, with power that comes from peace. And that's what makes your reveal so powerful. Not the crowd, but the character. Not the moment, but the maturity. Because what God does in you while you're hidden is what holds you when you're seen.